I never thought I'd see my quiet, suburban life spiral into a battleground over 6 feet of concrete. But that's exactly what happened the day Patricia Winters, though the neighborhood would soon whisper a different name, moved in next door. It started quietly, almost innocently. I remember the sun dipping low that evening, painting Ridgewood Acres in that warm orange glow that makes you forget you live in a world of bills and obligations. My little Toyota sat peacefully in my driveway. My modest lawn, with its neat edges and solar lights, felt like a badge of quiet pride. After 20 years in IT security, I'd finally carved out this peaceful corner of the world. I worked from home 3 days a week. I grilled burgers with my best friend Derek on weekends. I waved to neighbors I barely knew. And then Patricia arrived. She stepped out of her gleaming white Mercedes like she owned the street before the moving truck even finished unloading. She had that haircut. You know the one? Blonde highlights sharp enough to cut glass. A kind of suburban chic that says, "I chair the charity gala and I can ruin you with a single HOA complaint." I walked over like a good neighbor. "Welcome to Ridgewood Acres," I said, offering my hand. "Oh, I'm just thrilled to be here," she gushed, looking around like she'd just acquired a small kingdom. "My last neighborhood was going downhill. You know how it is. The wrong sort of people moving in, property values threatened." She said appropriate twice while glancing at my Toyota as if it were a stray dog. I should have recognized the warning right there. But I smiled anyway, offered a bottle of wine that weekend. A $50 boutique California Cabernet I was actually proud of. She took it like it was a homework assignment she didn't want to do. "Oh, well, I usually prefer Napa Valley vintages. This is European." I let the comment slide. Everyone's entitled to their preferences. I had no idea that preferences were going to become warfare. The first 3 weeks lulled me into false security. She waved from her porch. I waved back. Life went on. Then one Saturday, I came home with grocery bags digging into my fingers and a carton of ice cream sweating in the summer heat, only to find my driveway blocked. Not partially. Completely. A black BMW was sprawled across my driveway entrance like a sleeping dog. I parked on the street and walked into the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting from Patricia's backyard. 30 people in expensive casual wear were scattered across her new patio, sipping cocktails. Patricia was holding court with 4 women who looked like they were auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the smile plastered on my face. "Someone parked across my driveway. I can't get in." She barely glanced at me. "Oh, that must be Richard's car. He'll move it when he leaves." I blinked. "I need to park now. I have frozen groceries." She sighed like I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. "Richard," she called, "move your car for my neighbor, please." Richard sauntered over in a golf shirt that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, martini in hand. "Can it wait? Trish is about to tell us about the Simpson disaster at the Riota." "It's blocking my driveway completely," I said, tightening my grip on the grocery bags. "I can't get in at all." He rolled his eyes. "Fine." As he walked away, Patricia turned to her friends and stage whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "So sensitive about his little driveway. You'd think someone with that house would be more accommodating." A little ember of irritation flared in my chest, but I swallowed it. First time hosting stress, I told myself. People get flustered. It happens. I had no idea it was the opening act of a show that would last months. 3 days later, I came home to find her Mercedes angled across my driveway, 3 feet of my space swallowed by her gleaming bumper. I could squeeze in, maybe, if I didn't mind scraping the side of my car on her shiny paint. I knocked on her door, no answer, lights on though. I called the number she'd given the neighborhood directory, straight to voicemail. After a slow, careful, infuriating maneuver into my driveway, I wrote a polite note. "Hi, Patricia. Your car is partially blocking my driveway, making it difficult to get in and out. Would you mind parking fully on your side? Thanks." I tucked it under her windshield wiper. The next morning, her Mercedes was neatly in her own space, and my note was crumpled on my front step. The message was clear. 2 days later, she was back at it. This time, 4 feet into my driveway, I left another note, firmer this time. Patricia, please do not block any portion of my driveway. It's both inconsiderate and against City Ordinance 23.4. Thanks for understanding. Her text arrived that afternoon. Got your passive-aggressive note. A friendly conversation would have been more neighborly than quoting ordinances, don't you think? I texted back. I tried knocking and calling before the first note. I just need clear driveway access. Her reply came fast. Well, aren't we Mr. Important with our big driveway needs? It's barely a few inches, but I'll try to accommodate your special requirements. I showed the messages to Derek that weekend. Dude, he said, flipping a burger on the grill. She's marking her territory. By parking badly. It's a power move. She's making you adjust to her, testing boundaries, classic passive-aggressive play. I wanted to believe I was overthinking it. She's parking correctly now, maybe she got the message. Derek laughed. This type never stops after one confrontation, just wait. He was right. The pattern emerged like clockwork. She'd park correctly for a few days, then her bumper would creep back into my space. I tried everything. I left a plate of cookies with a friendly note. I offered to mark parking spots with chalk. I even suggested she could use my street frontage for guests as long as my driveway stayed clear. Nothing worked. The more I tried to be nice, the more deliberate her positioning became. And then came the morning everything changed. It was 6:30 a.m. I had a critical meeting across town. I grabbed my coffee, opened the garage door, and froze. Her Mercedes, blocking half my driveway. The only way out was across her immaculate lawn. I called her phone, no answer. I knocked hard. After a minute, lights flicked on. Patricia opened the door in a silk robe, eyes wide with mock innocence. Marcus, it's 6:30 in the morning. Is there a fire? Your car is blocking my driveway. I have an important meeting. I need to leave now. She peered past me, lips curling. Oh, that, you have plenty of room to get around it. I'd have to drive over your lawn. She smiled sweetly. Sometimes we all make little sacrifices to be good neighbors, like being woken up at dawn over a few inches of driveway space. My pulse pounded in my ears. Patricia, please move your car. She sighed like I'd ruined her spa day. Fine, let me find my keys and get decent. Some of us weren't planning to start our day yet. 10 excruciating minutes later, she moved the car 3 feet, just enough for me to escape without wrecking her lawn. As I backed out, she leaned against her doorframe, smiling. Was that worth the neighborhood disturbance? I arrived at my meeting 10 minutes late, my hands still trembling on the wheel. That night, a letter waited in my mailbox from the Ridgewood Acres HOA. Patricia had filed a formal complaint against me. Aggressive behavior, excessive noise, hostile living environment. And as I read it under my porch light, the truth hit me like a cold wave. She wasn't just blocking my driveway anymore. She was moving the battle to her home turf. And she was winning. Everyone in the neighborhood knew something was brewing, even if no one said it out loud. I could feel it in the stares from behind curtains, the quiet shift in tone when neighbors waved. Ridgewood Acres had been the kind of place where the loudest drama was a misplaced recycling bin. Now it felt like a stage, and Patricia had decided she was the lead. The letter from the HOA was still on my kitchen counter that morning, its official stamp like a threat. Aggressive behavior, hostile environment. I remember staring at it, the words blurring as a bitter thought sank in. She had flipped the script. All I had done was ask her to stop blocking my driveway, and somehow I was the villain. That night, I sat in my backyard with Derek, who was halfway through a beer and already shaking his head. She's gaslighting the whole neighborhood, he said. Classic move, make you look like the problem while she keeps doing whatever she wants. She filed an actual complaint, I muttered. HOA meeting next week. I have to defend myself like I'm on trial for owning a driveway. Derek leaned back in his chair, watching the glow of Patricia's patio lights. Laughter floated over the fence. "You need evidence," he said finally. "Video, photos, timestamps, something she can't twist into a story." I nodded slowly. "I have an old security camera in the garage." "Set it up tonight," Derek said. "You need to protect yourself. She's playing chess and you're still playing checkers." The next evening, the camera went up. A discreet black eye mounted under my roofline, angled perfectly to catch my driveway and the little slice of asphalt Patricia treated like her personal parking spot. For a while, it felt like maybe the camera itself was enough to scare her straight. For 3 days, her Mercedes sat perfectly aligned. No encroachment, no taunting bumper hanging into my space. But on the 4th day, the pattern returned. I came home to find her car positioned just so, rear bumper kissing the invisible line of my driveway. Not quite a violation, not quite innocent. I checked the footage that night. The timestamp showed her pulling in, pausing, and adjusting her car like a surgeon making a final cut. She knew exactly where she was parking. 3 days later, another maneuver, this time 6 inches deeper, then 8. It wasn't a mistake, it was a game. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, I had a full highlight reel ready. 10 clips of Patricia's careful encroachments, complete with timestamps. I walked into the community center that Tuesday evening feeling like I was walking into a courtroom. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. A long table at the front, folding chairs lined up in neat rows, and neighbors murmuring to each other like jurors waiting for testimony. Patricia was already there, perched in the front row like a queen awaiting her loyal subjects. She wore a cream-colored sweater set, pearls, and that ever-present smirk. When my name was called, I approached the board, my flash drive clutched in my hand. "Mr. Daniels," said Walter, the HOA president, a silver-haired man with the permanent tan of a golf enthusiast. "We're here to address complaints regarding hostility and excessive noise between neighbors. Would you like to share your side of the story?" "Yes," I said, and my voice trembled, not with fear, but anger held tight in my chest. "I've been repeatedly blocked from accessing my driveway by my neighbor, Patricia Winters. I've asked her politely to stop. I've left notes. I've tried to talk, and in return I got this." I placed the HOA letter on the table like Exhibit A. Walter cleared his throat. "Miss Winters, do you wish to respond?" She rose gracefully, every movement calculated. "Thank you, Walter. I just want to say I've tried to be a good neighbor. I'm still adjusting to the parking situation here, and yes, perhaps my car has been close to his driveway once or twice. But this," she put a trembling hand on her chest, "this campaign of surveillance, the threatening notes, it's been very stressful." Murmurs rippled through the room. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding. "With respect, I have evidence." I loaded the flash drive into the HOA's projector. On the wall behind the board, Patricia's Mercedes appeared frame by frame. 10 clips, 10 dates, 10 precise parking positions. "This isn't an accident," I said, my voice steadier now. "This is deliberate." Walter leaned back, squinting. "Mr. Daniels, while I see the issue, some of these recordings seem close. You're filming your neighbor's property." I blinked. "I'm filming my driveway, she's parking across it." Another board member, a woman I barely knew, tilted her head. "Still, it does raise privacy concerns. Constant surveillance isn't very neighborly." The word stung like a slap. Privacy concerns? I was the one trapped in my own driveway. Patricia's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. She didn't have to win the argument, she just had to plant doubt. In the end, the board gave me a warning. Me. About aggressive approaches to conflict resolution and neighborly flexibility. As I walked out humiliated, Patricia brushed past me, her perfume sharp and sweet. "So nice to see you tonight, Marcus," she whispered. "Hope we can all be more neighborly going forward." I clenched my jaw, every instinct screaming to respond, but I didn't. Not that night. The next morning, her Mercedes was back, rear bumper perfectly aligned to block exactly half my driveway. It was too precise to be coincidence. I stood there, coffee in hand, staring at that white SUV like it was a declaration of war. The quiet suburban street hummed with distant lawnmowers and birdsong, but all I could hear was the echo of Derek's voice in my head. She's testing boundaries. She wants you to break first. That was the moment something shifted inside me. For weeks I'd played defense. Notes, calls, videos, evidence. Patricia had the HOA. Patricia had charm. Patricia had the patience to grind me down. But I had something else. 20 years in IT security had taught me one lesson. If someone keeps breaching your defenses, it's time to change the system. I wasn't just going to push back. I was going to design a solution she'd never see coming. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching. City ordinances, property surveys, driveway access laws. The discovery came at 1:43 a.m. in a PDF buried on the city's planning website. My driveway apron, the little concrete lip where it met the street, extended 6 inches past what most people would consider the edge of my driveway. Technically, it was mine. Legally, it was part of my property. And that was exactly where Patricia loved to park. I called Derek the next morning. He whistled low when he saw the survey. "Legally speaking, that apron is yours," he said. "Whatever you put there, as long as it's not a public hazard, is within your rights." A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. "Then I think it's time," I said, "to get creative." That weekend, my dining table turned into a war room. Blueprints, legal notes, mechanical sketches. I didn't just want revenge, I wanted a system. Something precise. Something indisputable. Something that would turn her smug little game into a checkmate. The plan was ambitious, maybe even ridiculous. But as I sipped my coffee and sketched the first prototype, I felt the weight of weeks of frustration lifting. For the first time since Patricia had moved in, I wasn't just reacting. I was taking control. And I promised myself one thing. The next time her bumper crossed that line, she would never forget it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white Mercedes in my driveway. Not just a car anymore. A symbol. A reminder that my home, my sanctuary, wasn't really mine as long as Patricia Winters could waltz across my boundaries without consequence. The soft hum of my refrigerator was the only sound in the kitchen as I stared at my laptop. My fingers traced lines on a rough blueprint I'd sketched on a legal pad, the kind of midnight doodle born of quiet fury and relentless problem-solving. I wasn't a mechanic, I wasn't an engineer, but I'd spent 2 decades in IT security designing systems to keep out persistent threats. People like Patricia were just another kind of intruder. The rules were the same. When someone keeps testing your perimeter, it's time to build a stronger defense. The first step wasn't the hardware, it was the law. I spent hours scrolling through city ordinances, building codes, and property access regulations. I highlighted passages like I was preparing for the most absurd final exam of my life. The rights of a homeowner to protect driveway access from obstruction. At 3 a.m., I found the line I needed. The property owner has the right to ensure continuous access to their driveway, provided that any protective measure does not create a hazard to public roads or sidewalks. I smiled a tired, dangerous smile. If I did this right, I could turn my driveway into a fortress. The next morning, Derek came over with 2 coffees and an expression that said he already knew I'd gone full mad scientist overnight. "You look like a guy who either wrote a manifesto or invented something illegal," he said, handing me a cup. "Neither," I said, "but I think I'm about to spend $8,000 for the most satisfying moment of my life." I laid out the plan. A hydraulic post system embedded in the 6-inch strip of concrete that was legally mine. Pressure sensors, timed activation, rubber-capped posts that would rise just enough to immobilize a car without causing damage. A system that would trigger only if a vehicle stayed there for more than 5 minutes, so no accidental catches, no legal gray area. Derek whistled low. "You're actually doing it." "Oh, I'm doing it," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. If she wants to keep playing her little parking games, she's about to lose. The next few days were a blur of consultations and quiet, careful preparation. I met with a property lawyer, who reviewed my documentation with the bemused patience of a man who'd seen too many suburban disputes escalate to petty wars. As long as your system doesn't damage her car, he said, and it's entirely on your property, you're within your rights. I called a contact from my IT security days, a guy who built custom physical security solutions for high-end clients. He didn't even blink when I described what I wanted. Not the strangest request I've had, he said. I'll connect you with a fabricator, discreet, cash deposit required. When I left the workshop 3 days later, my truck bed held a collection of heavy-duty components that didn't look like much to anyone else. But to me, it was justice in a box. Installation started on a Thursday morning. I'd taken 2 vacation days, telling work I needed home repairs. Not a lie, technically. The crew was professional, quick, and most importantly, silent. I'd pre-printed utility maintenance signs and placed them around the driveway. Patricia watched from her window like a hawk, phone in hand, her expression bouncing between suspicion and curiosity. By sunset, the concrete was poured smooth, hiding the hydraulic system like a magician's secret trick. The control panel was installed in my garage. A tiny camera was wired to record every activation. When I flipped the test switch, 4 small posts rose from the concrete with a soft hydraulic hiss. They stood no taller than a soda can, capped with rubber to avoid damage. I ran a final systems check, logged the first activation test, and felt a thrill I couldn't explain. $8,000, 3 sleepless nights, but I felt lighter than I had in months. The next morning I installed the final touch, a sign. Warning, automated driveway protection system in use. Unauthorized vehicles may be temporarily immobilized. Property owner not responsible for delays or inconvenience. I barely finished zip-tying it to a metal post when I heard her front door slam. "What is this?" Patricia demanded, striding across her lawn in a silk blouse and yoga pants, like suburban royalty descending upon the peasantry. "A security measure," I said, calm as a monk, "to ensure my driveway stays clear." Her eyes narrowed. "What does immobilized mean?" "It means exactly what it says," I replied with a faint smile. "But I'm sure it won't affect you as long as you're parking correctly." Her jaw tightened. She spun on her heel and marched back inside, phone already in hand. I didn't need to guess who she was calling. Sure enough, Walter from the HOA showed up an hour later, wearing his serious face. "Mr. Daniels," he said, hands clasped behind his back like a mall cop. "We've received a report of some device installed on your property." I showed him the property survey, the documentation, and the city ordinance printouts. "The system is fully on my property," I explained. "It only activates if someone blocks my driveway for more than 5 minutes. It's legal, non-destructive, and fully compliant with city code." Walter frowned, flipping through the papers like he was searching for a reason to object. Finding none, he finally muttered, "Well, this is highly unusual." "Unusual," I said, "is waking up to find your driveway blocked 3 times a week. This is a solution." He left unconvinced, but empty-handed. And for 4 glorious days, Patricia parked like a model citizen. Perfect alignment. 2 full feet of clearance. The precision of someone who had just remembered what consequences feel like. I almost let myself believe the war was over. But I knew better. Saturday arrived, and with it Patricia's monthly social brunch, the suburban circus that had started this mess. Cars lined both sides of the street. Laughter and clinking glasses floated over hedges. I watched from my home office as her white Mercedes rolled down the street. She paused, glanced at my driveway, and then slid into her old favorite spot. Rear bumper just over the invisible line. I could almost see the smirk from my window. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, not from anger this time, but anticipation. The hydraulic trap had a 5-minute delay, long enough for anyone who'd made an honest mistake to move their car. 5 minutes. 6. At 6 minutes and 20 seconds, I heard it. The soft, almost polite hiss of hydraulics. On my security monitor, 4 little posts rose from the concrete, lifting the rear of her Mercedes just 2 inches off the ground. Not enough to damage, just enough to make moving impossible. I exhaled slowly. Victory at last didn't feel like shouting. It felt like a quiet, precise click. 45 minutes later, the first scream shattered the suburban calm. Patricia's heels clacked on the driveway as she marched toward her car, a brunch guest in tow. What have you done?" she shrieked, spinning toward my house. I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, the picture of innocent concern. "Everything okay, Patricia?" She jabbed a manicured finger at me. "You trapped my car." "I haven't touched your car," I said mildly. "But it looks like you parked over my driveway protection system. Did you not see the sign?" The guest gawked at the slightly elevated Mercedes, speechless. "Fix this right now," Patricia shouted, her voice breaking. "I'll be happy to deactivate the system," I said, calm as the morning sun. "As soon as you acknowledge that you've been repeatedly blocking my driveway and that it stops today." Her face twisted into a color I'd never seen on a human being. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll wait." And as she stormed inside for her phone, I took one last sip of my coffee, warm and satisfying. For the first time in months, Ridgewood Acres felt like mine again. The street was silent in that heavy way that happens right before everyone in a neighborhood pretends they're not watching. Patricia had stormed back inside, her front door slamming like a judge's gavel. I sipped my coffee on the porch, the taste warm and smooth against the electric tension crawling up my spine. I knew she was calling the police. And I knew I was ready. From my seat, I could see her brunch guests moving like nervous birds, peeking out from behind her curtains. The white Mercedes sat there, tail slightly elevated by my hydraulic posts like a trophy. It wasn't damaged, it wasn't trapped forever, but it was immovable without my say-so. Minutes crawled. A soft breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed, completely oblivious to the suburban war zone brewing on Ridgewood Lane. Then I heard it. The low hum of a police SUV turning the corner. Patricia burst out her door, practically running toward the car before it even parked. Her voice cracked through the still air like a siren. "Officer, he's vandalizing my car. He's built some kind of trap to harass me." I stood, calm and deliberate, and walked toward the sidewalk. My coffee mug in hand, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The officer stepped out, a tall man with a kind but wary face. His name tag read Rodriguez. He scanned the scene, the Mercedes, the small posts holding its rear just slightly aloft, and then me. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Whose vehicle is this?" "Mine," Patricia snapped, "and he's holding it hostage." Rodriguez turned to me. "Sir, is that true?" I shook my head slowly. "Officer, I haven't touched her car. It parked partially on my property, triggering my automated driveway protection system. There's no damage, and the sign clearly warns that unauthorized vehicles may be temporarily immobilized." Patricia's face went crimson. "Unauthorized vehicles? This is a street. I can park here if I want." "Actually," I said, keeping my tone even, "my property line extends 6 inches into that concrete apron. Her rear tires are on my property. I have the survey if you'd like to see it." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "You have documentation." "Oh, I do." I led him to my garage, flipping open a folder I'd prepared weeks ago. Property survey, city ordinance printouts, a signed legal opinion confirming I was within my rights. And because I wasn't leaving anything to chance, a USB drive with time-stamped footage of every time Patricia had blocked my driveway. Rodriguez reviewed the documents with a practiced eye. Then he walked around the Mercedes, inspecting the posts. He crouched, touched one with a gloved hand, and stood. "Ma'am," he said finally, I see no evidence of vandalism or damage to your vehicle. The system is on his property, and it appears to function as described. Patricia's voice rose to a pitch that probably made local dogs wince. So he can just kidnap my car and you're not going to do anything. Rodriguez looked tired. Ma'am, your vehicle is partially on his property. He warned you. He has documentation. Legally, he's in the clear. Her hands shook as she pointed at me. You're insane. This is harassment. I stayed calm. I had to. Officer, I'm happy to deactivate the system immediately, once Miss Winters acknowledges that she has repeatedly blocked my driveway and agrees to stop. Rodriguez turned back to her. Ma'am, that seems like a reasonable resolution. Otherwise, this is a civil matter. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her brunch guest, still hovering nearby, murmured something and quietly retreated into the house. 20 minutes later, after a lot of huffing and the kind of sighs that could win awards for dramatics, Patricia signed a short statement acknowledging her inadvertent pattern of partially blocking neighboring property and agreeing to maintain proper parking alignment. I pressed the garage button. The posts retracted with a soft hiss. The Mercedes settled onto the concrete with a gentle bump, free at last. Patricia didn't thank me. She didn't even look at me. She just climbed into her car, backed it up 6 feet, and parked perfectly along the curb like she was in a driving test. Rodriguez gave me a nod. Smart setup, legal, just unusual. Thank you, officer, I said. I just want to protect my home. When the police SUV finally rolled away, the street felt different, quieter, lighter. Patricia had just lost the one thing she valued most, control. But the war wasn't quite over. The following week, a bright yellow notice appeared in my mailbox. Emergency HOA meeting scheduled. Driveway device concern. I could almost hear Patricia dictating it over the phone, her voice sugary and venomous at once. Derek and I prepared like we were going to trial. I printed everything: photos, surveys, video timestamps, the police report. He even invited a friend from the city planning department to attend, just in case the HOA tried to bluff. When the meeting began, the board looked grim. Walter cleared his throat. Mr. Daniels, we've received numerous concerns about your driveway device. It's called a driveway protection system, I said, calm, steady, and it's fully compliant with city code. Patricia sat in the front row, arms crossed, eyes burning holes through me. The city rep spoke first, holding up my documentation. We've reviewed the installation. It's entirely on his property. It creates no hazard to sidewalks or the public roadway. From the city's perspective, there's no violation. The room murmured. Walter tried to pivot. Well, this device violates the aesthetic guidelines of our community, Section 5.3 of the HOA Covenant, I said, sliding a copy of the document across the table. Specifically exempts security systems designed to protect property access from aesthetic requirements. This qualifies. Silence. Patricia's face tightened, a single tremor running through her jaw. For the first time since this war began, she looked like she understood something she'd never wanted to admit. She couldn't win. In the weeks that followed, a transformation rippled through Ridgewood Acres. Patricia's Mercedes began parking with geometric precision, always a respectful distance from my driveway. She even started parking further down the street, leaving a generous cushion of empty space, as if my concrete apron had become radioactive. And something else changed, too. The neighbors, the ones who had avoided eye contact during the worst of it, started to approach me. Good for you, Marcus, Ellen from across the street whispered one afternoon. We've been putting up with her kind of behavior for years. Finally, someone stood up to her. I smiled politely, but inside a quiet warmth bloomed. For the first time in months, my home felt like mine again. 3 months later, a for sale sign appeared in Patricia's yard. By the time summer hit, she was gone, off to a gated community across town, where rumor had it, she told the real estate agent that Ridgewood Acres had declined and was no longer the right environment. The new family that moved in was the kind of neighbors you dream about. Young couple, two toddlers, invited the whole street to a barbecue the first weekend, and they always parked with care, waving every morning. The hydraulic system, I left it in place, though it never activated again. The small warning sign remained like a tiny monument to a battle won. And every time I walked past it, I thought about the day Patricia's face turned from smug superiority to stunned defeat. $8,000, 3 months of frustration. And it was worth every penny. But here's the thing about revenge. It's rarely about the act itself. It's about reclaiming your space, your dignity, the quiet peace of knowing no one can push past your boundaries ever again. And the best part? 1 week after Patricia moved out, I dismantled the hydraulic system. The posts, the sensors, gone. Because the truth was, it had all been a bluff. The posts never had to lift a car. The fear of them was enough. Sometimes the most powerful security system in the world is perception. You'd think the battle was over after the police visit, the HOA meeting, and Patricia's forced retreat to the farthest edge of the curb. But here's the truth about people like her. Defeat doesn't come with one big explosion. It comes in whispers, in quiet changes, in the way a street exhales after months of tension. The morning after the emergency HOA meeting, I walked outside to grab my paper. Yes, I still like the feel of newsprint, and I noticed something different. The air felt lighter. Patricia's white Mercedes was parked a good 6 feet from the edge of my driveway. I could have laid down sideways and rolled between her bumper and my property line without touching either. For the first time in months, I didn't feel that spike of adrenaline in my chest when I opened my front door. My home was my home again. Over the next 2 weeks, life began to settle. The first change I noticed wasn't even mine. It was the neighbors. People who had spent months peeking through blinds started waving again. I'd see Ellen across the street giving her flowers a bit too much attention when Patricia drove by. The Johnsons would pause their evening walks just a little longer near my yard, dropping quiet words of encouragement. "Good job, Marcus," Ellen whispered once, her eyes glinting. "We've been dealing with her forever at the HOA meetings. You finally gave her a taste of her own medicine." I only smiled, but inside I felt something warm. Relief, pride, and maybe just a little vindication. The legend of the trapped Mercedes began to spread. I'd catch snippets when I walked past open garage doors or chatted with neighbors by the mailbox. Someone would mention that system Marcus installed, or the way Patricia screamed so loud you could hear it halfway to Willow Court. Suburban folklore travels fast. Patricia, once the self-appointed queen of Ridgewood Acres, had become a cautionary tale. But while she retreated socially, she didn't surrender completely. I'd still see her peering out through her bay window, lips tight, watching me pull in and out of my driveway like I was a threat to her kingdom. She never said a word to me again, though. And then one day, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. The street practically hummed with unspoken excitement. She didn't host another brunch, didn't invite the tennis club crowd back, didn't so much as wave at passing cars. 6 weeks later, a moving truck idled in her driveway, and Patricia Winters was gone. The neighborhood exhaled. The family that moved in afterward felt like they'd been sent as a cosmic apology for everything that came before. A young couple with twin toddlers, bright smiles, and a dog that thought every front yard was a racetrack. The first weekend they moved in, they hosted a little housewarming. Everyone came. They even asked me nervously, "Is it okay if people park on the street here?" I laughed. "As long as nobody blocks my driveway, you're golden." And they never did. For months after Patricia left, my driveway protection system sat silently, unused. The little warning sign stayed up, sun-bleached but sturdy, a tiny monument to a suburban war quietly won. Neighbors would still ask about it sometimes. "Does it really work like that?" one asked. "Oh yeah," I said with a smile. keeps everything in order. But the truth, the real truth, was something I never admitted out loud. The entire hydraulic trap. It was mostly theater. The posts worked, they rose, they hissed, they immobilized her car perfectly. But they were never built to withstand a real escape attempt. The whole thing was a controlled bluff, a psychological trick dressed up like a fortress. I spent $8,000 for the performance of power. And it was worth every penny. One quiet evening, about a week after the moving trucks disappeared, I went out to my driveway with a wrench and a socket set. I disassembled the hydraulic posts piece by piece, sliding the components into storage bins in my garage. The holes in the concrete were filled and smoothed by a contractor the following day. By the time the sun rose the next morning, you couldn't even tell there had ever been a trap there. All that remained was the sign. I left it up, a silent reminder that boundaries existed, and that sometimes the idea of consequences is the most powerful consequence of all. Looking back now, I realize the war with Patricia taught me something I didn't expect. It wasn't just about parking. It wasn't even really about the driveway. It was about reclaiming peace when someone tries to take it from you inch by inch. About drawing a line in your life and saying, no further. Patricia never apologized. People like her rarely do. But the day she watched her Mercedes lifted just 2 inches off the ground by my hydraulic trap, something shifted. In her eyes, for the first time, there was fear. Not of me, but of finally facing a boundary she couldn't manipulate, charm, or bulldoze her way past. And that was enough. It's funny, the things that stay with you. Not the arguments. Not the HOA letters or the passive-aggressive texts. What stays with me is a single quiet moment. Me on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the morning sun glint off that white Mercedes as the hydraulics hissed for the first time. The sound was almost delicate. The victory was almost silent. And yet, it was the loudest statement I'd ever made in my life. Sometimes, revenge isn't about shouting. It's about patience. It's about creativity. It's about waiting long enough for the world to finally see what you've endured, and to smile when the balance tips back your way. And if you ever find yourself dealing with your own Patricia, remember this. You don't always have to fight loud to win. Sometimes, the quiet click of a plan coming together is all the victory you need. The summer after Patricia moved out felt like a different world. I didn't realize how much of my life she had occupied until she was gone. The tension that had been woven into every morning, walking outside and bracing for whatever stunt she'd pull next, vanished like smoke. I could finally sip my coffee on the porch without scanning for her white Mercedes. I could breathe. The street felt alive in a way it hadn't for months. Kids rode their bikes in lazy loops. Neighbors lingered at the curb with their dogs, chatting without that undertone of gossip or fear. It was as if the whole block had been holding its breath, and now we were exhaling together. The young couple who bought Patricia's house, Hannah and Caleb, changed the energy overnight. They painted the shutters a cheerful blue, hung a porch swing, and let their twins giggle in the yard with sidewalk chalk. Their golden retriever, Scout, became the unofficial mascot of Ridgewood Acres. I'll never forget the first weekend after they moved in. They hosted a casual evening cookout, nothing fancy, just burgers, lemonade, and folding chairs, but everyone showed up. We stood in their backyard, laughing and clinking plastic cups, and it felt like the neighborhood I thought I'd bought into years ago. Ellen leaned over to me as Scout tugged on her shoelace. "You know, Marcus," she said quietly, "we all watched you go through that ordeal. None of us had the guts to stand up to her. You did." I just smiled and shrugged, pretending it was nothing. But the truth, hearing that felt better than any HOA letter, any legal victory, any secret hydraulic system. The legend of Patricia's downfall grew with every retelling. By July, the story had warped into something almost mythic. Some neighbors swore my driveway trap, could launch a car into the air like a cartoon. Others claimed it could shred tires instantly or lock wheels like a boot. Even the delivery guy asked about it once, eyes wide. "So, this is that house, right?" he said, handing me a package. "The one where the car got stuck." I only gave a knowing smile, something like that. No need to correct them. Perception had always been the most powerful part of the plan. One night, I sat in my backyard with Derek, the glow of string lights catching the rim of his beer bottle. "You ever think about how much that whole thing changed you?" he asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "Yeah, I guess I realized something." "What's that?" "That peace doesn't just happen. Sometimes you have to fight for it, and not with yelling or fists or lawsuits. Sometimes you fight with patience and creativity." Derek grinned, "Or $8,000 of fake hydraulics." I laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in months, worth every penny. He shook his head in disbelief. "Man, the way she screamed when the posts lifted her car, I'll be telling my grandkids about that." I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the fatting sky. "You know, the posts weren't even real security. She could have driven off if she really gunned it." Derek nearly spit out his drink. "Wait, what?" "Stage hydraulics," I said with a smirk. "The whole thing was for show, just enough resistance to make the car feel trapped. It was all about psychology." Derek was silent for a moment, then laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. "You are evil, brilliant but evil." I just shrugged. Sometimes perception is the strongest lock there is. Weeks passed, and Ridgewood Acres slipped into the kind of quiet rhythm I'd wanted all along. Morning joggers, sprinklers hissing at sunrise. The occasional HOA email about lawn maintenance or recycling reminders. No drama. No letters. No passive-aggressive texts. Sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at the curb, expecting to see Patricia's Mercedes angled across my driveway again. But the space was always clear, sunlight hitting the smooth concrete like a silent trophy. I'd won, but more importantly, I'd reclaimed my life. The experience left me with a simple, unshakable truth. Boundaries matter. Not just the lines painted on streets or drawn on property surveys. The invisible ones. The ones that protect your time, your peace, your sense of home. People will push. Some gently. Some like a bulldozer with a pearl necklace. And if you let them, they'll take more and more until you forget what safety feels like. But when you stand firm, whether it's with a note, a plan, or a very convincing hydraulic system, something magical happens. You get your life back. One evening, months after Patricia's departure, I walked out to check my mailbox. A warm breeze carried the smell of someone grilling down the street. I heard laughter from Hannah and Caleb's yard as their twins chased Scout in chaotic circles. I paused in my driveway, hands in my pockets, and just smiled. It was quiet. Not the brittle, waiting for the next fight quiet I'd lived with before. The soft, real quiet of a neighborhood at peace. My driveway gleamed under the setting sun. And in that moment, I realized I didn't just win against Patricia. I won my home back. My street. My peace of mind. Sometimes that's the sweetest revenge of all. The funny thing about neighborhood legends is that they take on a life of their own. By the time autumn rolled around, Ridgewood Acres had turned my quiet act of suburban defiance into a myth. If you listen to the whispers, I wasn't just the guy with a driveway. I was that guy with the car trap. Some stories said my system could crush a tire in seconds. Others said it would launch a car into the air if anyone dared cross me again. I never corrected them. Perception was my fortress now, and it didn't need hydraulics to stand tall. I remember one Saturday morning, a delivery driver slowed in front of my house. He didn't pull up to the curb right away. He just hesitated. I could see him glancing at the warning sign, his truck idling. Finally, he parked a good 3 feet from the edge of my driveway and jogged the package up to my porch. "Hey," he said almost sheepishly, "this is the house, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "The house? You know, the one with the car thing, the trap." I smiled faintly, "Something like that." He nodded quickly, handed me the package, and practically sprinted back to his truck. I stood there a moment, watching him pull away, and couldn't help but chuckle. The truth was, the system had been gone for weeks. But the idea of it, that was all I needed. The legend of Patricia had become a cautionary tale, told in fragments at mailboxes and backyard barbecues. Ellen across the street swore she'd seen Patricia at the grocery store, glaring at a box of wine like it had personally wronged her. The Johnsons claimed she told someone she'd moved to a community with proper standards. But nobody missed her. Sometimes, when I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, I'd see her ghost in the quiet, an echo of that white Mercedes angled across my driveway. And in those moments, I'd feel something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not even triumph. Relief. Because the truth was, Patricia had taught me a lesson I didn't know I needed. Boundaries. People talk about them like they're abstract, like something therapists mention in podcasts. But living next to Patricia made boundaries very, very real. They were 6 feet of concrete. They were early mornings where I couldn't leave my house. They were crumpled notes and passive-aggressive texts and HOA letters that made me feel like the villain in my own life. And one day, I decided enough was enough. I didn't scream. I didn't start a fight. I didn't break the law. I just quietly built a line she couldn't cross. A line she had to see. A line she had to respect. And that line gave me my life back. The new neighbors, Hannah and Caleb, loved to host little weekend gatherings. Nothing flashy. Nothing like Patricia's curated social showcases. Just kids laughing, burgers sizzling, the kind of easy comfort you feel when people are simply neighbors. One night, we were all sitting in their backyard. The twins were asleep, Scout snoring in the grass, string lights swaying gently in the evening breeze. Caleb nudged me and grinned. "So the story, true or not true?" I raised an eyebrow. "Which version?" "The one where you, booby-trapped your driveway and scared the queen of Ridgewood Acres out of town." I chuckled softly. Let's just say, sometimes people leave when they finally meet a boundary they can't charm their way past. Hannah laughed, shaking her head. "I'm just glad we moved in after all that. I can't imagine living next to her." "Trust me," I said, sipping my drink. "You don't want to." That night, walking home under the soft glow of porch lights, I felt a deep, satisfying quiet in my chest. It wasn't just that Patricia was gone. It was that the fear was gone. I hadn't realized how much space she'd taken up in my head, how much energy I'd spent bracing for the next note, the next car, the next accusation. But now, the only sound was the hum of crickets and the faint whoosh of a sprinkler somewhere down the block. I paused in my driveway, staring at the spot where the hydraulic posts had once lived. Smooth concrete. No traps. No secrets. Just space. Space that was mine again. I didn't need the trap anymore. The sign stayed up, not because I wanted to scare anyone, but because it reminded me of something important. Sometimes, taking your life back isn't about fighting harder. It's about fighting smarter. It's about reclaiming your peace without losing yourself in the process. And maybe, just maybe, it's about having the courage to say, "This is my space, and I will protect it." Months later, I got a letter from the HOA. Not a complaint. Not a warning. A thank you. Apparently, Ridgewood Acres had seen a marked increase in community satisfaction since I resolved a long-standing neighborhood concern. In simpler words, the street was happier because Patricia was gone. I framed that letter. Not because I cared about the HOA's approval, but because it was the closest thing to an official record of victory I'd ever get. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone who finds themselves in a similar battle, it's this. You don't always need to yell to be heard. You don't always need to fight to win. Sometimes the quietest victories echo the loudest. Winter came quietly to Ridgewood Acres. The maples that lined our street dropped their leaves in a slow golden rain, and the world felt softer, calmer, like the neighborhood itself had settled into a deep, contented sigh. And for the first time since I'd moved here, I felt completely at peace. I'd sit on my porch in the cold morning air, coffee steaming in my hands, watching the breath of Scout, the golden retriever next door, puff like tiny clouds as he bounded through the frost. No Merceds. No creeping sense of dread. No edge-of-the-curtain glares or crumpled notes on my steps. Just the life I thought I was buying when I signed the mortgage. Quiet, safe, ordinary. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about Patricia. Not in anger anymore. Not in triumph. Almost like thinking about an old storm that had passed. I wondered if she was happier in that gated community across town, where the HOA probably held cocktail hours and measured hedges with rulers. I wondered if she still thought of Ridgewood Acres as beneath her. I wondered if she told anyone the real story, or if she spun a new one to make herself the victim in her own fairy tale. Maybe it didn't matter. Because in the end, she taught me something I hadn't learned in 43 years of life. Boundaries aren't just for driveways. One crisp evening, I found myself walking the street alone, listening to the crunch of leaves under my shoes. The streetlights cast warm pools of light on the smooth concrete, and every porch glowed with the soft, golden flicker of early holiday decorations. I paused at the end of my driveway, staring at the little warning sign still planted at the edge of my property. It was sun-faded now, the letters a little dull, but it still read. Warning, automated driveway protection system in use. A bluff, a trick, a psychological fence dressed up as steel. And yet it had done something no amount of shouting, HOA meetings, or passive-aggressive notes could ever accomplish. It gave me my life back. I remember the day I finally took the sign down. It was spring by then. The air smelled like wet earth and blooming lilacs. Hannah and Caleb were in their yard with the twins, and Scout was busy trying to catch a butterfly that had absolutely no interest in being caught. I crouched by the edge of my driveway and loosened the bolts, one by one. The metal felt warm under my hands, like it was holding the memory of every battle, every petty slight, every quiet victory. When I lifted it out of the ground, I expected to feel vulnerable. But instead I felt free, because I didn't need it anymore. The legend was enough. The lesson was enough. And the peace I'd earned. That would last longer than any sign. A few weeks later, I was out watering my small front garden when Ellen strolled by. She slowed, smiling knowingly. Finally taking it down, huh? I nodded, yeah, feels like time. Good, she said, leaning on her walking stick. You don't need it anymore. Whole neighborhood knows the story, and the right people learned their lesson. I smiled, I think so. She took a few steps, then paused and looked back. You know Marcus, sometimes people like her. They don't just push into driveways, they push into your life, your time, your head, what you did. She tilted her head, eyes kind. You built more than a trap. You built a line she couldn't cross. Not everyone has the guts to do that. I didn't have an answer. I just nodded, feeling that quiet truth settle somewhere deep inside. Months later, I hosted my first little barbecue in years. The twins chased Scout through my yard. Caleb manned the grill like a pro. Hannah brought over a pitcher of homemade lemonade. Ellen sat in a lawn chair, fanning herself with a magazine, while the Johnsons shared neighborhood gossip about a new couple moving into Willow Court. It wasn't a fancy party. No curated brunches, no manicured social events, no competition. Just laughter, just neighbors, just the life I wanted all along. As the sun set and the street grew quiet, I found myself standing in my driveway, looking out at Ridgewood Acres. The concrete beneath my feet felt different now. Not because of the system that once lived there, but because of what it represented. Peace, hard-earned and fully mine. I thought back to the morning when I first saw Patricia's Mercedes lifted those 2 perfect inches off the ground. That soft hydraulic hiss. That stunned silence before the scream. Not because of cruelty. Not because of malice. But because in that instant, I had reclaimed something she could never take from me again. Control over my own life. If you're listening to this story, maybe you've had a Patricia of your own. Maybe someone's pushed past your boundaries, inch by inch, until you barely recognize your own peace anymore. And maybe you've wondered what it would feel like to finally take it back. Hear what I learned. You don't have to fight loud to win. You don't have to play their game. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is quietly, patiently, and creatively draw your line and hold it. Because peace isn't given. Peace is claimed. The hydraulic posts are gone. The sign is gone. Even the HOA has long since moved on to complaining about mailbox colors and trash can storage. But every morning when I step outside and sip my coffee, I see that empty stretch of concrete and remember. It's not just a driveway. It's my boundary. My space. My reminder that sometimes the quietest victories echo the loudest. And I smile, because Ridgewood Acres is quiet again. And so am I.